And we're live. What's going on, guys? We are here with another, I guess we'll call it an expert interview. This has been one that's heavily requested. We've actually had him on twice before, once on YouTube. You can go back in our YouTube video history, find that one. And once on our podcast, Keto for Normies podcast. That was a couple years ago, I believe. It's
Yeah,
always nice to hear from him. It is Dr. Ken Berry. How's it going?
it's going great. Good to chat with you again, Matt.
Yeah, great having you. And I guess from the first time we interviewed you, definitely more of a keto diet. And I think that's evolved over time. Are you calling it Ketovore? Is that the thing?
Well, I think there's a spectrum of what I consider to be a proper human diet. And for some people who are very young and metabolically resilient, that can be low carb. For people who need a little more aggressive, it can be keto. Then moving even lower carb would be ketovore, which is a very meat heavy, very, very low carbohydrate diet. And then the ultimate low carb diet, which I've been eating for the last 19 or 20 months, is a carnivore diet. And I think that along that spectrum is a diet for every human being on the planet that will give them the best health they can hope for at their current age and their current health status. And so ketovore is kind of in the middle between keto and carnivore. And Nisha and a couple other ladies thought up the name ketovore, and I think it's pretty catchy.
Yeah. You need a good name to get people to just kind of start associating with it and sticking to it. So that spectrum, is there something that's more applicable to someone who's like just coming off a standard American diet? Is there some sort of sequence they should follow? Do you think it makes sense? Because a lot of people they're attracted to extremes. So to
Yep.
me, someone who's, eating McDonald's yesterday and they ask, should I do a carnivore diet? To me, it's kind of like a red flag, maybe not. But what do you think about that?
No, I agree. And, some of us are early adopters of new technology and new eating strategies. And for someone like that who's an early adopter, they might just overnight go to carnivore. But I think for the average person, keto and ketovore and carnivore, they sound very complicated. There's all these rules. I don't really understand it. So I've got four basic rules for anyone. Literally, if last night you had a supersized Happy Meal with, chicken nuggets and the big fry and the big Coke, and you're like, yeah, no, I've got to stop that. I've got to get healthy, right? So there's four steps to going low carb keto, ketovore, carnivore. Step one is to remove all sugar from your diets. Definitely the added sugar, but for most human beings, even the natural sugars, if you're eating tons of grapes and bananas, or you're drinking lots of fruit smoothies or fruit juices, that's too much sugar for a human being. Never in our history on this planet did we ingest that many carbohydrates on a daily basis. So step one, get rid of all the sugars, definitely the added sugar, most of the natural sugar as well. Step two, get rid of all the grains. And now on this journey that I've been on the last 3 years, Matt, I have delved deeper into human nutrition but also into paleoanthropology and paleopathology and anthropology and archaeology, and I've been looking at all these diets of our ancestors. We've only been eating grains as any substantial percentage of our diet for about 10,000 years. Before that, we might eat some, if we found some grain, we might eat it if we were starving, but we just didn't do that. We were not grainivores back in the majority of the time we've been on this planet. And so for most people, grains are too high in carbohydrates, number one. But number two, they also contain plant defense chemicals, because they don't want you to eat their seeds. And that's what grains are, is the baby plant. They don't want you to eat that. So they can't protect it with claws and fangs and pouncing on you and killing you. So they protect it with chemicals, right? The phytochemicals that naturally occur in every grain. And so for wheat, it's gluten and gliadin. For corn, it's zein. Every grain, every seed has this defense mechanism. Now, seeds that are contained in a really hard shell, like some of the nuts, they may not have as much of this because they've got that hard shell to protect them. But definitely any grain that you can just pick and eat, the plant doesn't want you to do that. So most people do best when they eliminate all the grains, even paleo-friendly grains like quinoa. They're too high in carbs, and they're too high in these inflammatory phytochemicals. And then step 3 is to eliminate all the vegetable oils, all the shortening, all the cottonseed oil, canola oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, peanut oil, corn oil, all that stuff is very inflammatory to the human body. It has an unfortunate omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, but it also oxidizes very rapidly. And a lot of research seems to point to this oxidation as being one of the causes of arteriovascular disease, of plaquing, of plaque buildup. And that's step 3. And then step 4 would be to eat lots of fatty meat. Mm-hmm. So when in doubt, eat eggs or meat. That's always the go-to on any low-carb strategy. If you're like, I don't know, is this mug cake? Is that keto? Is that carnivore? I don't know. Eat fatty meat, and you will never go wrong eating fatty meat and eggs. And so back to the paleoanthropology and the paleoarchaeology and the paleopathology, when I started looking into this, we have eaten meat for the majority of our time on this planet. It's not even up for debate. It's a quite settled science in the paleoanthropological circles that, we are in some cases super carnivores. We ate more meat than actual carnivores ate. And so for anybody out there, if you've been told, oh, you shouldn't eat red meat, you shouldn't eat fatty meat, you shouldn't eat saturated fat, whoever just told you that, you can safely unfollow them and ignore any further advice from them, because they have no idea what is contained in a proper human diet. So those first 4 steps are going to get anybody, even the brand new initiate, they're going to be able to quickly move to a very healthy, delicious, nutrient-dense, proper human diet with just those 4 steps.
Yeah, I like that. Really simplifying it. I find that I agree with them all, of course. I find that doing which I've done a lot of too, looking back, even at the recent history, like Weston A. Price, early 1900s type of stuff, I find that to be really telling. But when you start going back super far, it's a lot of, I feel like you can find whatever you're looking for to confirm your pre-existing notions. But of course, it makes a ton of sense. I sort of adhere to the thinking that we were like scavengers, using our brains, obviously, to source food. Obviously, sure. And we have this weird dynamic these days where we think we're going to trick our bodies by eating low calorie foods to lose weight. Yeah. Where of course, out in nature, we'd always be seeking out the most calorie dense foods imaginable, sure. Which is usually animal foods, animal fats. I like that. And then the grains, I think a lot of people have issue with, just because conventional wisdom these days says that grains, have your 12 servings of whole grains a day. And a lot of this to me is grounded in just the belief that what is natural generally is good until proven otherwise. And I think that's where people maybe they can find some flaws in this whole thing. But that's sort of like the pinpoint that my whole philosophy falls on. And that makes a lot of sense to me. So going back to the grains, what's wrong with grains? Why did they become such a big part of our diets? And is it bad to have like a few servings of grains? Because I know it's a cheap source of calories. Is it really bad for us?
Yeah, and so several things there to unpack. For somebody who's very young, metabolically resilient, having some grains occasionally is probably not a big deal for them at all. Where it does become a big deal is if someone is already hyperinsulinemic or already pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic. You want to keep your carbohydrate intake as low as possible. Now, what you said earlier is that when you look, if you look for what you're looking for in the research, you can usually find it. That's absolutely true with the bulk of the nutrition research. That you're absolutely spot on correct there. But when it comes to the paleoanthropological evidence, that's actually not true at all. So you can look all you want to for a vegan society that thrived and took over half the world. You're never going to find that. You can try to look in the stable isotope analysis literature for societies that were predominantly grain-based or plant-based. And before 15,000 years ago, you're not going to find that. It doesn't exist because that didn't exist in reality back then, right? And so we actually have lots of archaeological and paleoanthropological evidence that when human beings did start eating the bulk of their calories from grains about 10 to 12,000 years ago, depending on where we're at in the world you're talking about. We actually started to be shorter. We started to have very poor bone health. Our bones became much more porous and much weaker, much more prone to breaking. Our dental health just went to shit when we started eating grains as a large source of our calories. Dental abscesses, cavities, dental caries just explode. If you find a skull from 50,000 years ago, they'll have one cavities or no cavities. Now, they may have some teeth knocked out from trauma, right? But they're not going to have any evidence of dental abscesses or their teeth rotted out. But after the grain revolution, and there's multiple theories about this, I don't think it's proven why we converted. I think it's probably a multitude of reasons why we slowly as a species converted from a meat-based diet to a grain-based diet. But every marker of health that we can go back and look at then got worse when we became a grain-based society. And so there's an excellent book on how it's a theory that perhaps wheat civilized us and domesticated us versus us domesticating wheat. And it's a very compelling theory to look at it, because we actually got much sicker and much less aggressive and apex-like when we started eating grains.
Yeah, so I read this book. I forget what it was called. I think it was by Tom Savage, The History of Food, something like that. And the idea is we make these small sacrifices that are suboptimal, but they help like prolong the species. So like eating grains as a bulk of our diet isn't the healthiest, but you can store it through the winter, and it just ensures the survival. It's kind of like the same thing going on now with technology. Like just giving all our data away to Google is not optimal. Right. But when I open Chrome and I just type in weather, it knows where I am and it tells me the weather. It's little stuff like that it sneaks up on you, and it's tough to not just go with the flow. So we do have a few questions here in chat. People want to know about artificial sweeteners, or even just like sweetness in foods in general. Even like natural sweeteners, stevia, monk fruit. How does that fit into the optimal human diet?
So for 99.9% of our time on this planet as Homo sapiens sapien, we would have a sweet taste in our mouth of once or twice a year. Okay, we would find some berries, we would find a honey tree, and we ate the heck out of them, and we laid around in a sugar coma for a day or two afterwards, and we packed on 3 to 10 pounds of body fat because of that sugar gorging. But for the majority of our time, the only sweet taste we ever tasted was our mother's milk. And after we were weaned from the breast, we would go our entire life and there was no sweet taste. So thinking that we need a sweet treat every day is a very modern thought. It's a very unnatural thought. And I don't think it's always bad, uniformly bad or evil, but it's just not necessary. But we've been trained by all the millions of dollars of advertising we've seen in our life that we deserve that we need that's going to make us happy, going to make us content. And so a lot of us, your age and my age, we've grown up believing that if you don't have some kind of little dessert once a day, then you're somehow deprived, right? And I used to totally believe that. But now I've broken my sweet tooth so much that over Thanksgiving and Christmas, I had a few little keto treats that the girls had made. But on a daily basis, I never have any sweet taste in our mouth. So there's the two things: the carbohydrate count. If you're using real caloric sweeteners, you got to contend with the carbohydrates you're getting. But if you're using non-caloric sweeteners, even the keto approved sweeteners, you can't ignore something that's very strong in the addiction research literature and in the nutrition research literature. Much of the addiction research, you've heard that rats will press the lever more for sugar than they even will for cocaine. And that's true. But they'll also press the lever more for saccharin. And really any artificial sweetener that's ever been tested, you can addict them more. And it's the sweet taste, Matt. It's not necessarily the magic evil sugar molecule. It's the sweet taste. We have an inborn drive in us. And the whole reason is so that you can pack on stored energy, which is fat, so you don't starve to death over the winter. We have a drive for this sweet taste, and it can be very habit forming. And some of us and some of the leading authorities in addiction literature say that it is addictive in nature.
Yeah.
And you've talked to many people I know, and I have too, who when they try to do step one and stop the sugars, they're like, dude, what's wrong with me? I got keto flu or something. I feel like crap. I got a headache. I'm nauseated. I have body aches. I can't sleep. I'm irritable. And what I always tell people is I want you to go and look up the side effects of stopping smoking or quitting alcohol if you're addicted to those substances. The symptoms you just told me literally overlap 100% with the symptoms of quitting nicotine or quitting alcohol or even quitting an illicit drug. The withdrawal symptoms are basically the same. And then we've also got the PET scan data that shows that when that little rat's pushing the lever, even for saccharin, he's lighting up the same spots in his brain that you would light up with sex or nicotine or alcohol or cocaine. So to say that it's not a habit forming, it's not addictive at all, I think is very premature and very short-sighted. I think there's a bell curve when you talk about any aspect of human physiology, right? Mm-hmm. For some of us, sugar and sweet taste are not really habit forming at all. Just like some of us could, smoke crack for a month and then walk away from it and never think about it again. But the majority of us, if you smoke crack for a month, you, my friend, going to have to go to rehab and then probably fight it for the rest of your life. And the same goes for this addiction to sweet and to sugar and to the non-nutritive sweeteners. Some of us, it doesn't bother us at all. We don't even give it a second thought. Others of us, it is a hard addiction to break, and it's going to take a while to break it. And then you have to be vigilant in the future. And for me, example, I'm 100% a sugar addict. Just the keto treats that I had over the holidays, which were all low carb and used xylitol, erythritol, monk fruit. After a few days of that, I was in the fridge about 6 p.m., 7 p.m. looking around like, what do we got in here? We got some little, is any of that mug cake, any of those little keto brownies left? Yeah. It was already after just a few days, it was calling to me. Yeah. And I had to recognize that for what it was. I had to look in the mirror and go, dude, you're a sugar addict. Stop it right now. Or you're going to be back where you used to be when you were fat and pre-diabetic. And that was it. I had to have that little conversation with myself, and then I stopped it. And I slapped that monkey off my back, and I got right back on the carnivore train. And when I'm eating carnivore, I don't even think about sugar unless I have some little snacks, and then I start to think about it again.
Yeah. That's like me with video games. I play for one day and I'm just like, I'm hooked. I'm like, how do I become the best in the world? How many hours a day is this going to take me? So
yeah. What's the World Series pay if I win this?
Yeah. But there's this interesting concept because we're so rooted nowadays in like modern conventional wisdom, well-balanced meals. When you read books, and what I really like reading is just like not overt nutrition books, but I'll just read like a history book, Roman history, and there'll be small little excerpts about what they would eat and stuff. Yep. And maybe not so much with Roman history, but like at least Weston A. Price, early 1900s, his research, a lot of it was like mono meals. It's just like you eat one thing. You eat the steak, or you eat something from a seal or whatever. Yep. And we have this idea where you're supposed to have all these different flavors and tastes. And I distinctly remember when starting keto, I would have my dinner and it would just be, or like maybe my lunch, I'd have like eggs, some kind of meat. And I would be very full. Like I had just eaten a lot of food, but you just have this like calling of the sweetness. You need like the change in textures and tastes. And that's tough to get over. And I associate that sort of with like, it's not like a strong addiction the way I think we think of it today, but it's definitely just like a constant calling for the sweets. And Absolutely. someone in that situation, what do you think is the best approach to get over that?
Well, I think if it really interferes with your activities of daily living, if you're obese, or you're pre-diabetic or diabetic, then it is important enough to make changes in your life that I really think that it's beneficial to call that an addiction or to call that a habit. And you need to try to break that habit. And I've got YouTube videos about the strategies you can do. You can actually watch any YouTube video if you watch one about stopping smoking, because the strategies for stopping smoking are going to be exactly the same strategies for stopping the sugar and the sweet addiction. Same goes for alcohol. You've got to replace that crutch with new crutches. That's just what you have. A good friend of mine, Dr. Robert Sivas, he's great at talking about the strategies and the mindset about how are you going to break that? Because someone who's relatively slender, it's not the end of the world if they have a really sweet mug cake for dessert. It's not a big deal. But for somebody their life is literally at risk because of their multiple medical problems, because of their hyperinsulinemia, their metabolic syndrome, this is not a joke and this is not a game. These people are going to die prematurely. and they're going to suffer greatly before they die prematurely if they don't stop this never-ending cycle of, I wonder if there's anything sweet. They've got to break that, because that really calls on all kinds of other things. And you were mentioning earlier about the Roman society. One of the plant-based movies recently, this kind of a docudrama trying to get you to eat plant-based, they were really talking about the gladiator diet, right? And how they ate beans and rice. That's what they fed all the gladiators, because that's the ultimate performance food. And obviously these people didn't delve too deeply into Roman history, or they would have realized that gladiators are slaves and prisoners of war. Yeah. It was not glamorous to be a gladiator. You were not at the top of the social order. You were a literal slave as a gladiator. And so, you would feed gladiators beans and rice, because you sure the hell weren't going to feed them the good meat, because they're slaves. They're not going to get anything good. You're going to give them just enough food of just enough quality so they don't starve to death, so that you can get 2 or 3 more battles out of them before they get eaten by a lion or stabbed. And so anybody, because, the movie Gladiator, that all of a sudden made being a gladiator very sexy. Yeah. You can be like Russell Crowe. You can eat the gladiator diet. Well, being a real gladiator in the real Roman times was nothing like that. You were literally treated like a dog or worse, and you were fed the cheapest food they could find, which was beans and rice and bread. That was it.
Yeah. There's this weird dynamic where we come full circle on a lot of things. Like, you start out as a slave and you're eating slave food. You get some form of affluence. You start eating, like, you go back to like Marilyn Monroe's diet, famous celebrity. I don't even know, like 1960s, maybe 70s. She's eating like steaks rare and some carrots and stuff. I looked back at her diet, and she was big on eating beef liver too. And then we come full circle. Now we're all super affluent, 2020, 2021. And they're selling us like processed Beyond Burgers as just repackaged slave food, but they're charging us more. It's insane. But I wanted to touch on the step 4, which was eat fatty meats. Why is that good? Because a lot of people, even when they're sort of like, okay, this makes sense. What we're doing in modern dieting today is wrong. I think keto makes more sense. They're still a little hesitant with the animal fats. Why is that?
Well, I think it's just because of training. As we've grown up in this modern society with all the plant-based commercials, and then all the plant-based gurus out there telling us, fatty meat is just bad by definition. It's evil. It's the devil. You said earlier that we started out as scavengers, and I think that's absolutely right. I don't think we started out scavenging the leftover lean meat on the carcasses. I think the first stone tool human beings ever used was a big brown rock, and we used that to smash craniums and get the brains. Because most of the other carnivores couldn't get to the brains. The bony calvarium is too thick. Mm-hmm. But we figured out how to use a big rock and smash that. Brains stay good for 7 or 8 days in a kill because it's contained. The bone marrow stays good for a week or more. And so we started cracking femurs and cracking humeri and cracking skulls and getting this pure fat. And so when I say fatty meat, I don't want you eating skinless, boneless chicken breasts. That's okay. But that's not where optimum human health lies. Optimal human health, we need 4 things, and nobody disagrees with this, I don't think. We need amino acids, which come from protein. We need fatty acids, which come from fat. We need vitamins, and we need minerals. That's what we need, right? And there is no source that's more nutrient dense of all 4 of those things than fatty meat, and then organ meat, and then of marrow, and then brain, if you can bring yourself to eat it. I like it, but we don't eat that daily, weekly, or even monthly, but maybe one day we will. But I think that the nutrition contained in fatty meat, plus the satiety that you get from eating the combination of fat and protein, like it occurs in every cut of meat in the wild, that's going to give you more satiety. And when you're full, when you're satiated, it's much easier to say no to a potential sweet or sugar addiction than if you're hungry and you're craving, because you're going to fail. If you're hungry and also you're craving, you're going to fail and you're going to eat all the whatever. But if you're full with all the fat and all the protein, all the vitamins and minerals that your body needs, it's much easier to say no to that addiction. Also, fatty meat is essentially 0 carbs. And so that makes it very easy. You never have to think, wait a minute, how many carbs are in this roast beef or in this bone marrow? You don't have to worry about that, because there's never going to be enough carbs to matter. So by default, if in doubt, eat fatty meat. You're never going to go wrong. All of the nutrition research that showed that meat caused cancer or that it caused heart disease, if you look at that research, which I have done, it's not fun, it's very boring, but it's all observational research, which is the weakest kind of research that you can possibly do as a scientist. It's also not blinded and not controlled. And so the majority of the nutrition researchers at the Harvard School of Public Health, they believe in their heart of hearts that they're honest people. They believe that plant-based is healthiest for human beings and best for the planet. And so when you do a research study with these preconceived notions, if you don't control that research and you don't blind it, then your preconceived notions are going to slip into the results. You have to protect those results. And in the vast majority of nutrition research, there's no protection there. And so it's very easy, it's human nature, for your preconceived notions and your deeply held beliefs to sneak into the results and therefore contaminate the results. Because no matter how strongly you believe that plant-based is best for humans and best for the planet, you're wrong. That's just my opinion, right? But if you don't protect your research, then that's going to sneak into your results, and it's going to bias your results, and they're not dependable at all.
Yeah, well, a phenomenon that's starting is, and I think it's snowballing. It becomes more exponential. Is if you don't have a diversity of viewpoints in the room, like putting together this study or this hypothesis, certain questions don't even get asked. So, like,
that's right.
Are we to the point where, like, is red meat healthy? Is that a question we still ask? Really, probably not. Like I was talking to Gary Taubes a couple weeks back, and he said, like, all the studies. We have all the studies we need to prove, there's not going to be any more better studies that are done in the near future that are going to like prove whether red meat's healthier or not healthier. It's kind of just like looking back at the old data and making sense of it.
Yep.
So that's sort of an interesting topic, but yeah, I mean, it's hard to say that we're winning is the sad thing, but, yep. I think it has to be just more of a grassroots movement. When enough people try something and fail, there's the obvious alternative.
At the top, both in the ivory tower, and then also in the tallest of the skyscrapers, you've got big food manufacturers. There's Beyond Meat and PepsiCo just announced a partnership where they're really going to promote plant-based, right? Mm-hmm. Now, of course, they're going to say they're doing that because it's good for human health and good for the planet. But it's also great for profits, right? Because you can take sugar and grains and vegetable oils, all of which are plant-based, and you can make literally any form of food known to man, or make it appear to be that food. Even you can fake it and make it look like meat, right? And the profit markup is in the thousands of percent. And so if you look at just a ribeye steak, if you follow the cow from the ranch all the way through to the supermarket, there's maybe 30 or 40% markup on that ribeye. No multi-billion-dollar corporation is interested. They wouldn't even walk across the street for a 30% markup. They could care less about that. But if you're saying, hey, you can take this subsidized grain and this subsidized vegetable oil and this subsidized sugar, and you can make any damn thing in the world, and you can have a 1,000, 2,000, 3,000% markup on the profit. Suddenly Pepsi and Beyond Meat and Mondelez and Kellogg's, they're all interested in that. Because ultimately their allegiance is to their board of directors and to the profit of their shareholders. Their allegiance is not to your health, nor is it to the health of our planet.
What's crazy to me is that we fall for the marketing. Number one is there's no health claims really made. There's no discussion of like the nutrient density of the Beyond beef patty. It doesn't really come up. It's just, it tastes like meat. There's no follow-up question. It's like, is it as healthy? And that we fall for the marketing where it's like people in a science lab, like I saw there's like this hydraulic press and it's like testing the bounciness of the patty. And it's like, how do we think that's normal and good? We just like,
right.
This reminds me of like the Wonder Bread era where it's just like more science, like just keep doing science to our food. Yeah. We love it.
Yeah.
And I felt like we had like a reflexive response to that where it was like, okay, now it seems like science in our food is bad, but now we're back to like, okay, more science. Let's do the lab grown, which I haven't looked into too much. I don't know how the nutrient profile of that is. I don't even know if
it's terrible.
It's terrible.
It's terrible.
Okay.
If you compare the full nutrient profile of any cut of meat, even the cheapest Walmart or Costco meat you can find to the best quality plant-based meat, it's a joke. Plant-based meat is a joke. There's the vitamins and minerals are just, it's devoid. It is a simulacra of meat. That's what it is. It is not, it no
That's
way
a vocab
compares
word.
to meat.
What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a good word. Simulacra is basically what the Disney castle is, a simulacra of a real castle.
Okay.
Right. And in no
simulation,
way
something.
to a real castle. It's just a false image.
Yeah.
Right. And so always, even in early agriculture, when we were crossing this tomato with this other tomato, when the grocery store, the modern supermarket came into existence, farmers were asked to create foods that were bigger, tastier, and more shelf stable. That's literally the three criteria. Mm-hmm. No supermarket said, hey, we want a more nutritious tomato. No, this never, no, it actually didn't occur to anybody. And a big part of the mineral deficiencies that a lot of us have is because we've bred all the fruit, all the vegetables, and even in a certain respect, the meat to be bigger, plumpier, juicier, sweeter, nicer looking. Those are the criteria that you go for a supermarket shelf. It has to be pretty, spotless, no blemishes, has to last for a long time. And so it's come to the point where we actually pick tomatoes when they're green, spray a chemical on them to ripen them in transit. And then here's this beautiful spotless tomato. If you compared that to the nutrition of a tomato that's ugly and, looks terrible, that was grown 100 years ago, the 100-year-old tomato, when it comes to the mineral content, blows the modern supermarket tomato away. We can sort of detect that with our taste buds, because if you've ever had a farm fresh tomato, you're like, oh my, damn it, that was good. That was way better than that simulacra tomato on the supermarket shelf. Yeah. And so I think that you're right. It's a grassroots movement, because Pepsi and Beyond Meat, they're not interested in nutrient density. They don't even want to talk about it. But the average person like you and me and people joining us today, they are interested in nutrients. They want a mineral-rich food. They want a vitamin-rich food. They want all their amino acids and all their fatty acids. That's what health is. That's where health comes from. And so I think there's this huge grassroots movement that's saying, I don't care if it's beautiful and pristine and has a long shelf life. I actually want it to be full of nutrition. Call me crazy. I don't know. But I actually want my food to be nutrient dense. And I don't think this movement that you and I are a part of, I don't think it's stoppable without ultimately without regulation and new laws and perhaps the threat of force. Because once someone starts to eat a nutrient dense diet like real whole food keto or carnivore, you're not gonna make them go back to eating processed grains and vegetable oils. They're just not willingly going to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. An interesting thing, which I never thought of, I grew up basically just textbook, Midwestern American. You go to the grocery store and you look at country of origin. That's something you can start doing, and just kind of running yourself through the process of how that food got there. When you go to Whole Foods, for example, they're pretty good about it. A lot of the stuff you'll find there is regional. Some of it still, though, is China and, random places all over the world. But it's definitely something worth looking at. And we have this perspective where we're doing our macro trackers, MyFitnessPal, and we put in spinach. And we think spinach from Walmart is the same as spinach from a local farm from Georgia, nutrient wise. We use Chronometer or whatever, and it tells you the micronutrients in it. And you're just getting generic spinach as what you think you're getting, but obviously it's wildly different from where you get it from.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm a huge proponent of being as much of a locavore as you can. And that's why Nisha and I are basically moving back to the farm, because we're going to start growing our own stuff. And if it scales up to the point where we can help feed other people with that, we definitely will do that. But I don't know how much work's going to be involved in that. We'll see if it scales up or not. But we're definitely going to feed our family with food that did not have to come across the ocean on a cargo ship, that did not have to come across the country on an 18-wheeler. Because, the plant-based people love to talk about cow flatulence, and they love to talk about manure, and they, all this stuff and how it's so terrible for the planet. But they don't want to talk about the 18-wheelers that truck that spinach to your local Costco that was grown in California and trucked all the way up. They don't want to talk about that. And they don't want to talk about your papaya and your mangoes and your star fruit and how that was on a cargo ship. several days coming across the entire ocean to get to your local Costco. They don't want to talk about that because the way to protect our planet and save our planet is to eat local. That's literally going to just decimate the carbon that's being put, not sequestered in the ground, but put in the atmosphere. That'll stop that overnight if everybody started eating as locavore as they comfortably can, and always be on the lookout for a local source of fill in the blank, whatever food you're looking for. It starts out with eggs, because in every community within 10 miles of everyone watching, there's a little old man or a little old lady that's got 10 chickens in the backyard, guaranteed. And they'd be happy to sell you those eggs that were made of bugs and grass. How much over the course of a year, if you start buying your eggs from that little old lady, how many carbon credits is that worth? I don't know. I haven't done the math yet, but that matters. When you find a local rancher for sheep or beef, over the course of your lifetime, how much carbon are you going to keep out of the atmosphere that didn't come out of that tailpipe, bringing you your beef all the way across the country from Wyoming or wherever? That kind of stuff matters a lot. But the big corporations, they don't want to talk about that. They just want to talk about cow flatulence.
Yeah. Yeah. And even more of a concern these days, like we've been buying from a local farm pretty regularly for the past few years. But I like the idea of being like, you go to the grocery store, the food's there. That's our experience so far, my 32 years on Earth. But you know what happens when it's not there? That's now more than ever, I think, is crossing people's minds.
And it should be. Everybody listening, what Matt said just now, that should not sound weird to you or strange. After this little virus thing we had, and, farmers having to pour out millions of gallons of milk because it just couldn't go to this market. It had to go to that other market. Our food system, our food chain is very fragile. And so if you've got a source of protein and fat that you can in a bind, you could just walk down the road and get it. That's very resilient. That's, as Taleb would say, that's anti-fragile, because only a catastrophic event locally would mess that up. No earthquake in another part of the world would ever mess that up. No strike, no war, we ran out of fossil fuels. You remember peak oil, right? Nobody talks about that anymore, but that didn't go away. That's still a real thing. And if you look at the production, that's still real, and that's going to happen one day. I don't know when, but you need to be looking at local sources of food where the first name of the person who grew it or ranched it. You're on a first name basis with them. And that's important. And Matt knows that, and you better know that too. If that sounds weird to you, you need to get your head out of the sand or out of your body orifice and start looking around, because that absolutely could happen.
Yeah. So a lot of people in chat asking about, and this can you can also talk about your plans for the regenerative agriculture on your farm there, and what that does for the environment and the food quality. People asking the importance of food quality, I guess budget dependent, like how much does that move the needle, like getting grass-fed meats versus the conventionally raised from Walmart, for example?
Yeah. So for the majority of people listening to this, just eating fatty meat, that's what's going to move the needle the most for you. Just avoiding sugar and grains and vegetable oils and eating fatty meat, that's going to move the needle 80%. Okay. And I want everybody to realize that if you can move that needle 80% of the way towards optimal health with just those 4 steps, then once you've got that under control, under your belt, you got that, no problem. Then you can start worrying about these little 1% problems. That's what I call them. So if you look at the omega-3 fat content of just grain finished beef, the cheapest Costco, Walmart, wherever beef you can find that comes in the big stick, like a big stick of bologna, right? The omega-3 of that meat versus the omega-3 of grass-fed, grass-finished, panda massaged, that grazed on the Alps, it's going to be about 3% better, but it's going to cost anywhere from 50 to 250% more. So for the average person with the average income, just focus on eating fatty meat. Always buy the best quality you can afford, but if you can't afford that Himalayan grazed meat, screw it. You don't need it. It's a 1% problem. Is it better? Yes, it's better. Is it better enough for you to have to pay $22 a pound for it? No, it is not.
Question on this real quick. Is if you're buying the cheap stuff, ruminant animals, are they more protective with the, like, how the omega 3 to 6 ratio accumulates in their fat, like based on their diet? So if you're buying the cheap stuff, are you better off buying like lamb, cow versus pork and chicken?
Yeah, there's more research that needs to be done on this question, but for my personal experience and for what I've seen in the literature and in the nutrient counts, I think the ruminant animals, so that would be cow, goat, sheep, elk, venison, any ruminant animal, which means they have a multi-chamber stomach, they chew their cud, and they have a huge amount of bacteria in their gut that actually is able to break down cellulose and use it. It seems that eating that kind of meat is more protective. And so if you feed a pig or a chicken just a crap diet, basically a standard American diet, then their meat is not going to be nearly as good as a pastured pig or a pastured chicken that was able to actually eat bugs and grass and grub worms. Whereas the ruminant, passing through these membranes, seems to purify the fats and the proteins even more. And so I stick with ruminant meat as much as I possibly can. And I think that's probably good advice for most people. It's not that chicken's bad or pork is bad. It's just, in my opinion, less good. But eating pork is still better than eating Doritos, and eating chicken is still better than eating whole wheat bread. Yeah. So you have to think about this spectrum of goodness. This is bad. This is great. So, pork that's the grain fed maybe here, pork that's pastured maybe here, but here is still better than the damn Cheetos. You got to always think about the spectrum of goodness and badness.
Yeah, we get caught up in the minute details too much. Just doing the big things is all that really matters. And then you're thinking about starting, I don't know if this is public knowledge, but you're starting at some point a farming channel, or you're at least going to like document your farming journey to some degree. Yeah. So for someone like me, I don't know a ton about regenerative agriculture. What does that mean exactly? Why is it better? And just walk us through that a little bit.
So if you look at the big confinement feeding operations where they've got 1,000 head of cattle in this tiny, building, and they're just feeding them nothing but grain, and they're standing in their own poop. That's obviously unnatural, unhealthy. That's where all the super bugs, you see the E. coli 0151 that can kill you. That's where that kind of stuff comes from. But on a real farm, cow manure is actually a resource. It's not a waste. Cow urine is actually a resource. It actually regenerates the pasture and actually feeds all the plants and all the bugs and microbes and worms and bacteria. That actually regenerates the soil. If people are not aware, we have a devastating loss of soil in the United States. In Iowa and Illinois and places like that, the soil used to be 8 feet deep in places, and now it's a few inches deep. That's a huge danger, but people don't realize that because we think, well, they just spray with this magical stuff from Monsanto and ConAgra and then it's fine. Yeah, no, it ain't fine. Okay, we're still able to eke out an existence on that soil, but that's not optimal at all. So when you're able to farm regeneratively, it's even actually better than sustainable because you're actually improving the soil. And when you improve the soil, you, by definition, improve anything that grows in the soil, don't you, Matt? And you improve anything that grazes on that soil. You've actually improved that food. Mm-hmm. And you're also improving the earth because the soil is part of the earth. So if you love the earth and you love your health, then I think we all should move towards this. But one thing we're going to really be focusing on the farm channel is, well, okay, I live in an apartment in New York City. How the hell is anything you tell me, how's that going to help me? Well, guess what? Instead of having those 2 cockatiels in that cage, you could have 3 quail in that cage and get 3 quail eggs every day.
Really? And wow.
Whoa, wait a minute. What? Yeah, you can order quail and have them delivered to the post office. And then they'll lay you eggs. You can hatch the eggs. It's very easy to set up a little shoebox egg hatcher if you want to have more quail. Or then every now and then you can eat a quail. All of a sudden, you've got regenerative agriculture going on in this apartment on the 73rd floor in New York City. What? Yeah, that kind of stuff is possible if you get out of your box and think outside of your box. All of a sudden, you're growing cilantro out on your balcony, and you've got 3 quail sitting and you sold those cockatiel because they don't, you can't, you know, you got rid of them because they're not helping you.
They're annoying.
Now you've got quail eggs every morning for breakfast. Hello.
Yeah.
That's the kind of change I'm talking about.
Okay, that's a niche market for someone to tap into. Apartment regenerative agriculture. That'd be a cool YouTube channel.
Absolutely.
So how scalable is this? Because obviously, I think that's one of the bigger concerns. It has to, for it to really take hold, it has to achieve some sort of scale, right?
Well, the funny thing is that it's scalable in either direction. So you can start off with your 3 quail in your New York apartment, or you can start off with your 1 acre little, you know, your backyard basically. And and so if one person is doing that in the neighborhood, you're like, well, that's not making any difference at all. But what happens when everybody is doing that?
Oh, you're back.
Sorry, I'm back. Sorry. Yeah. What happens when everybody in the neighborhood has got 3 or 4 chickens and a small plot in the backyard where they grow turnips and whatever they want to grow? That all of a sudden, that's a game changer. It's such a game changer, in fact, that back during World War II, the federal government would put up posters encouraging people to do that, because all of the food we were producing was going to feed the boys across the seas fighting in the war. To anybody who says, well, that's not scalable, then why did the federal government spend $1 million advertising to Americans, hey, get some damn chickens, grow some potatoes in the backyard, grow some stuff in the backyard? Yeah, it's 100% sustainable. And then what happens when you've got a 5 acre plot? All of a sudden, you can start growing 2 or 3 pigs for you, but you can also start growing 10 pigs to sell to your neighbors or to share with your neighbors, depending on how charitable you're feeling. All of a sudden, that becomes much more scalable, because you're actually not only feeding your family, you're feeding the neighbors down the road as well. And that one change, when you're able to grow or raise enough food to feed your family, that's a huge victory. Mm-hmm. But then when you're able to feed one other family, wait a minute, Matt, that is the definition of sustainable. Mm-hmm. And so when all of us start doing that, before long, on our 50 acres, we're feeding 10 neighbors, then we're feeding 20 neighbors, and then 50 neighbors. How can you say that's not scalable? When you stop, okay, so 40 of the acres we're going to be on pasture have been in soybeans for the last 15 years. And so every year they would just get a check when the guy, he farmed the land and got the soybeans, and he would give them a bean check at the end of the year. We're going to turn all that back into pasture. And how many, by using management intensive grazing, how many sheep, how many head of cattle, how many pigs a year can we feed other people with? Mm-hmm. On that was, you know, getting a few hundred bushels of soybean that you can make some Beyond Burgers with. All of a sudden, I'm growing real protein and real fat that's actually real nutrition for real people. Don't even tell me that's not scalable or sustainable. It's all of that, plus it's regenerative. That's what's going to save our human health. That's what's going to get rid of the diabetes epidemic and the fatty liver epidemic. And that's what's going to save the planet from global warming.
Yeah, no, I love this. I haven't, is there like a prominent speaker who's like really thought, you know, the next 10, 20 years into the future on this topic, what it's going to look like? Who do we look to?
Oh yeah, there's a long list of them. If anybody's interested suddenly in regenerative farming or regenerative agriculture, or especially regenerative ranching, then you need to look up Joel Salatin. Mm-hmm. He's got a ton of YouTube videos. And then my current favorite is a guy in Missouri called Greg Judy. Just look up Greg Judy. He's the most entertaining fellow you ever watch on YouTube. He's got sheep, he's got pigs, he's got cattle, and he loves his life and he loves what he does, and it's fun for him. He's not working, he's playing out there with his animals. And so if you want to get one sheep to put in your half acre backyard, 100% do that. If you want to get 4 chickens to put on your quarter acre backyard, 100% do that. Don't get a rooster or the neighbors will be complaining. But if you get 4 hens don't crow and they still lay eggs, right? So there you go. There's a fun tip from the farm for you. Just don't get a rooster. If you get a rooster, eat him and then keep the hens.
It's funny because I'm hearing you talk, and then I'm also hearing like the utopian technology future that is, you know, kind of in our minds too. And they don't seem symbiotic to me. But
they are, Matt. I'm glad you brought that up. This is very important. We are a very technologically advanced modern species, and I am not against that. I'm doing this on my iPhone, I don't know, 12 or 13, whatever the latest iPhone is now, right? I've got my ring light, I've got my tripod, I've got all this, I've got my laptop sitting here. I'm 100% pro technology. I'm 100% pro. I want the most modern this, that, and the other for some things. But here's the key. Here, people have to separate what you use from what you eat. It's a huge difference, okay? Let's take your house cat, for instance. If you feed your house cat a plant-based diet, they will go blind. They will develop fatty liver. They will develop type 2 diabetes because that is not the proper cat diet. Cats are carnivores. They have to eat meat, right? If you don't feed them meat, they're going to suffer. It's just, and that's cat abuse. But human beings are also a distinct species. We are Homo sapiens sapien. And you can have the most modern cell phone and the most modern laptop in the world, and that's great. I love that stuff. But you have to understand we are an ancient species, and there is a proper human diet for us. And you cannot modernize food. Food has to be real food, and it has to be the real food that we've eaten for the last 200 years, or you are going to cause an epidemic of chronic disease, as we can see from our modern diseases of obesity, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, chronic inflammation, all these cancers, all these autoimmune conditions that used to be exceedingly rare are now quite common. That's because we're trying to eat a modern diet. So it would be the same if PepsiCo and they went into cahoots with Mondelez and they said, hey, we've come up with this new fake air. We want you to stop breathing that old air, buy this new air from us, breathe this. No, there is a certain kind of air we should breathe. And the best kind is the kind that's out on the farm. And that's the air that human beings are supposed to breathe. Oh, we've got this new factory-made water. It doesn't actually, we put the hydrogen and oxygen together, and it's better. It's more modern. You need to drink that water and stop drinking regular water that comes from springs and from other stuff. No. When it comes to what we put into our body, it has to be primal and ancient. It has to be the real stuff, or we're going to suffer. So have all your modern toys. That's great. But when it comes to what you put inside your body, that has to be ancient. It has to be the real stuff, or you're going to suffer with chronic disease.
Yeah, no, I love this idea. I think you've probably thought about this way more than me. So just my initial thoughts, like the CSA model where there's a community center, because like not everyone's going to be having chickens and stuff, right? Some of us just want to be tech bros and like do our coding and buy.
Play your video games. Yeah. No, I get it.
So the CSA model, that seems good. Then there has to be some sort of, there's going to be a PepsiCo of regenerative agriculture at some point, I would think, right? And then,
well, yes, there are, because you can scale up regenerative agriculture to an extent.
What happens?
But
to the
you
standards?
can never make you can never make real food shelf stable, Matt.
Yeah.
You can never make real food.
No, that's what I'm saying.
On the shelf.
I'm just saying the power accumulates. There's bigger operations.
So what this is going to encourage is the other thing we talked about early is we're going to have. So you're not going to have 10 meat processing plants for the whole country. You're going to have a meat processing plant in each community. And there's going to be a guy, and he's the meat processor guy, and he's going to be where you take your chickens and sheep, and then he's going to sell directly to the local stores. And so you're going to encourage this local economy, which is also very resilient. Because if everybody doesn't think that we're in a huge bubble right now, economically speaking, oh, hell yeah, we are. Just wait and see. But if you've got all these very resilient local economies, if something big happens in New York, I'm not even going to feel it in Tennessee because I've got my local meat guy and I've got my local vegetable guy and I've got all these local resources. My grandmother said something to me. She was a child during the Great Depression. And I was asking her about it. And she said, we didn't even know there was a depression. Literally nothing changed in our life. We had we had the family cow, we had chickens, we had pigs. We went hunting all the time. We grew our own food. We had no idea, except my dad went to town and read it in the newspaper. Oh, there's a depression. Huh? Who knew? Yeah. Because they were so resilient at a local level that a recession or a depression, it almost becomes meaningless when you've got your own stuff within walking distance. That kind of stuff just ceases to have meaning.
Yeah, very interesting. So like companies like ButcherBox comes to mind where they started up 5, 8, probably like 8 years ago now. I am always questioning. I'm like, okay, they were small back then. How are they scaling up? So like, what happens to the quality? That's my question. So like, I'm assuming at some point in this regenerative agriculture thing, there's going to be the guys from Wall Street that come down and they're like, okay, we can make this work. But then what happens to the quality? I assume there has to be some sort of like standard. There's going to be some kind of testing standards. Like, what do we look for, I guess, when we want to make sure we're buying from operations like this?
Well, and so I think Butcher Box is a great example. They probably started out buying their meat from one ranch.
Yeah.
And as they've scaled up and become much bigger, they didn't put all those cows in a feedlot and start feeding them grain, because that's how most people want to scale up. They want to modernize it. But I suppose and I hope what Butcher Box did is said, okay, we've maxed out this ranch. We're going to have to find another ranch that ranches regeneratively. And now we're going to have to find a third ranch and a fourth ranch. And what I would hope eventually would happen with a company like Butcher Box is that they would have a global list of ranchers, right? And so if someone ordered Butcher Box in Canada, Butcher Box's computer algorithm, right, the very modern thing, it would look for ranchers as close to that person as possible. And so then they would be getting, sheep from Saskatchewan, and they would be getting their beef from Manitoba. I don't know. I just made those up. But they would not be getting New Zealand lamb, because that is ridiculous to ship New Zealand lamb to Canada. Why would you? That's not scalable after a certain point. But if you've got 40 sheep ranchers in Canada, then that person's going to get local meat, but they're still going to get it from a name they know and trust, Butcher Box, which has now become global. Well, let's say we go 10 years into the future. If Butcher Box scales this up appropriately, always honoring the sheepness of the sheep and the chickenness of the chicken, as Joel Salatin says, then they're going to do it. They'll scale up properly, and you'll still be getting an ancestrally appropriate food in your Butcher Box. Yeah.
Okay, and then we do got to wind down here. I've kept you long enough. Last question from chat is people trying to adopt more of a locavore diet. How do they do that? Is there good resources for finding local farms and stuff nearby?
Yeah, there's a couple of websites, and if anybody knows them, put them in the comments. I'm blanking right now. There's two that I use that will, anywhere in the world, it will find a local source of basically any food that you're looking for. And then there's another one that's just US based, and it looks for local regenerative farms. But yeah, 100%, because what you're going to do is every time you buy local eggs or local beef, you're voting with your dollars, because you just didn't vote for ConAgra and Tyson Foods. You didn't vote for them, but you did vote for the local economy. And when there's enough people, when that local rancher, when he goes to McDonald's to have coffee and play on his cell phone, because he's a modern creature, and he tells his other rancher buddies, dude, you're going to have to scale up. I'm tapped out. I've sold every sheep I got. I need help. And look how much money I made. Then all of a sudden, all these other guys are going to go, wait, you made how much? Oh, hell no. I'm about to convert my soybean pasture we're going to start grazing sheep again. And I'm going to start getting into this market too. You encourage people to go back into local agriculture, into regenerative agriculture. When you keep voting with your dollars locally, that's what's going to change the world and save the world. I'm 100% convinced of that.
Yeah, the two websites I know of is eatwild.com and I think realmilk.org, or just Google Real Milk Finder. Those are both US from my knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay, and that is going to do it. Real quickly, where can they find you? And I know you have one book that is out, and you republished, right? You have like a second edition of it now, The Lies My Doctor Told Me.
Yeah, Victory Belt Publishing picked it up, and they actually, it's now a real book. They put some illustrations in it and got rid of the typos. So Lies My Doctor Told Me is now available everywhere books are sold. And there's also an Audible. If you have ADD like me and you have to listen to a book while you do 4 other things, then there's an Audible. I'm working on a second book now that will be out within 1 to 7 years because of my ADD. It's called The Proper Human Diet. Yep. You notice I talk about that a lot. I try to post at least 3 new videos on my YouTube channel every week, talking about nutrition, health, medicine, low carb, ketovore, carnivore, keto. And then I'm always on Facebook. We do a Facebook Live every Monday night at 7 p.m. Central Standard. And just for a solid hour, we answer low carb, keto, carnivore, fasting questions for a solid hour. If you want the snarky side of me, follow me on Twitter. I'm always slapping around PepsiCo or Coca-Cola or Mondelez or somebody or Beyond Meat. I'm always slapping their chops and saying, "Hey, that's bullshit. Let's actually tell the truth here." And then if you want the loving Dr. Berry, I'm on Instagram posting pictures of Beckett and stuff like that.
Yeah, awesome. Oh yeah, we got to have you on another time and just talk about like childhood nutrition and stuff.
100%. It's very important.
Yeah, thanks so much. Check out his YouTube channel. He's got videos all the time, every topic. You guys are always asking me like about gout and all this stuff. I don't know. Go to his videos and find the answers.
I got one.
Yeah. Thanks so much.